Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Viewers Comments number 10. I'm Adam Steele for the Hot Pole Studios, and today I'm in Studio B. It just so happens that I've got a bit of time to get these done, so I'm going to get the old iPad out, and we're going to look through what some of you guys have been saying to us, and respond appropriately. First question. This is from Ty Vernon, who says, "Hey, could you explain how I view Cubasis on my Mac Pro like you have on your monitor?" Now, what he's asking here is, in the video that we did about Cubasis, you can see that I'm using an iMac, and you can see the iPad screen on the iMac. And on macOS specifically, what you can do is you can use a USB cable from the iPad or an iPhone into the Mac and use QuickTime. And in the QuickTime setup, there's screen recording, and you can choose, instead of the Mac screen, to record the iPad screen. Now, the downside is there's a massive delay, like a couple of seconds of latency, which, if you watch some of the earlier iPad videos that we did, are really quite kind of off-putting with that whole kind of trying to make noise through a massive latency. And as of late, it doesn't work very well either with iOS updates and all that kind of stuff. I find that the audio apps quite often crash it, which is why I'm trying to work out a way at the moment to do more iPad tutorials using an HDMI dongle. You know, we have every dongle that you can possibly imagine, and this is just for iPads, but one of them has HDMI out, but that doesn't let you behave. Doesn't let you record it, so we're finding a way to do that in the very near future. So stay tuned for that. On the Africa Toto 7-string bass mix video, Guitar Gamery said, "I mean, WTF dude, what was that? Toto? Are you sure?" Yes. If you didn't like it, you could just say that. That's fine, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but just asking me what that was doesn't sound very smart to me. The very recent coil rub video that we released. So, a guy called Rob Chapman, who I don't think is the well-known Rob Chapman, I think it's somebody else, said there are OEM recone kits for greenbacks still. And I see there are some kits available for Blue Dogs as well, but I think there may only be aftermarkets available for those. It's like changing your brake pads in your car. There are some things where well-aged is definitely not a good thing. PA speakers are definitely designed to run at maximum power. I generally disagree with this. Not that this guy's wrong, he's got a good point. If you were to use something fairly well, like a guitar speaker, over a long period of time, it is going to sound different to what it did when it was originally made. Sure, I mean, especially if it's been in brutal conditions where it's got kind of damp and then dried and then the speakers buckle and they... But that is it's part of the appeal for vintage collectors. It's called patina. It's like if you get a mid-50s Telecaster that's got all the original parts, all the original electronics, chances are it won't sound the same as it did when it was new. I mean, if it did, why not just buy a new one? Like with the Telecaster, all the woods will have aged and all that kind of stuff. But when with speakers, the aging process will do something to the speakers that certain people want. I mean, if I can, I'm going to see if I can find a couple of vintage speakers and a couple of new equivalents of the same, and see if comparing them, if there is any discernible difference, because telling me there's a difference is different from me semi-scientifically comparing them back to back, which is part of what this channel's for. So, we'll see. Here's one on the Reaper 101, basic and getting started. Why not add the reverb as an effect to the track, as opposed to sending it to Bob? Now, if you've not watched that video, Bob was just a name that I gave to a channel, a separate kind of send aux track, if you will, that had the reverb on. So what this guy's asking is, why would you send to a reverb on another track rather than having it as an insert, which is putting it on the same track as your audio? Now, it's not unheard of to have something like a reverb unit in line with a particular instrument, but there are loads of downsides to doing it that way. Like, that particular reverb is then set only for that instrument. The settings that you've set, if you change them on that instrument, it won't affect anything else. There's no way for you to process that reverb separately, whereas if it was on a separate channel, you could maybe EQ that reverb, compress it a bit, distort it a bit if that's your thing, and that won't affect the original main sound. Like, something I do a lot is with a snare drum, I might have it go into a reverb, but the reverb's not got a lot of low end in it because that can make a mix sound really muddy. But if that was on the snare channel, I'd be taking the low end out of the snare as well, which would make it sound really thin and papery. So by separating the two, I can have control over both. That's the reason why you would do that. Also, you can have less reverbs over the whole project if it's a big project. You can have, maybe I might have 10 or 20 tracks going just a little bit to a reverb, and then if I decide halfway through the production that maybe the reverb's not quite set right, maybe it's a little too long or too short, I can go and change 1 or 2 dials and that affects the whole mix, rather than having to do it 20 times. And that makes life so much easier, it makes things more fast, more efficient. Question on the Celestion Redback review. Do they make it in a 15-inch? Unfortunately not. And 15-inch guitar speakers are not particularly common. Celestion used to make a G15M, which is a greenback in the 15-inch, which I've been finding recently, and I'm going to see if I can get hold of one of those for the channel, but they were never meant as guitar speakers. The G stood for general, so they were more like low-end PA speakers. But the guitar speakers, they're not that common in a 15-inch. Bass speakers more so. Celestion do make a speaker called the Fullback. The Fullback is a 100-watt 15-inch guitar speaker, and I'm going to see if I can have a look at one of those at some point in the future. It's a very different sound to a 12-inch or a 10-inch. It's not lower, it's kind of growlier, it's more baritone. So we'll check that out at some point. Question on the 7-string bass video. Where can you even get strings for that 7-string? Well, this is something I'm going to do an entire video about. Long story short, not many places make separate 7-string bass sets. You'd either have to go somewhere for a custom set, or get a 6-string set and a custom extra string depending on what gauges you're using. So keep your eyes peeled, there'll be a full video about that fairly soon. Something on the modifying an SM57 video. No one hears some weird stereo thing going on? Whenever I do a comparison, I do it in stereo, so I have a left track and a right track, and I reamp them independently of each other so that all my comparisons are in stereo. Reason being, most of the production work that I, and a lot of people do now, is in stereo. And I find you can really make out differences in a very different way when things are done in stereo. If someone just gives me a simple single mono guitar speaker sound and then compares it to another one, I might hear a difference, but I won't hear the context. The context to me is very, very important. If it sounds different to you, but then you get it in the room, you record it for a production and it doesn't do what you want it to do, it's because to me, you probably didn't hear it in its context. So yeah, it's not a weird stereo thing, there's no processing, it's just one on the left, one on the right. Nice and simple. On the Pro Tools first 101 video that I did recently, just go to your settings and make Prefader metering off for that issue. A couple of people said that. Long story short, I had forgotten about the whole metering thing in Pro Tools and how by default it's on Prefader metering, which is something that I personally find to be stupid. Because if you're turning up and down your faders, I want the meters to go up and down accordingly. I'm less interested in the levels before the faders, because if I'm working properly they shouldn't be clipping, and so that's not supposed to be an issue. So I would rather the meters showed me the levels that I'm getting now, which means if I can't hear something or something's too loud, I can see very quickly on the meters. What's doing that? Just personal preference, but there must be a reason why every other DAW by default uses post-fader metering. The question on a cover that I did a while back. What bass do you play? Adam is unknown. Well, for those of you who haven't seen me before, well, my name is Adam, and that bass is a jazz bass. It was originally a Squier Vintage Modern. It's one of those where I've modified it to the ends of the earth. It's got everything new apart from, I think, the neck and the body wood. So like the tuners are upgraded, the bridge is upgraded, the electronics are upgraded, the pickups are now DiMarzio Ultra J's. Even the strap pins are upgraded. Everything is completely different. So I went with a custom water decal. I didn't want to put Fender on it because it's not a Fender, so I got someone to make kind of a custom Adam Steele kind of version of it. On the Celestion Alnico Cream, which we reviewed a while back, James Murphy asked a question. Will these work with a lower wattage amp like a 25 watt head? Or do you really need a 100 watt head to push the speaker? That's a good question, James, because a 90 watt speaker, you would assume you would need some amp of wattage close to that to get that to work. However, that's not the case. I talked to the guys at Celestion about this, and they reckon even with a 1 watt amp, this speaker would sound fantastic. The wattage rating of a speaker, all that really is kind of a guideline to how much power you can put through that speaker reasonably before it starts to overheat and burn. In the short term, there's a good chance you could put 100 or 120 watts through this speaker briefly. As long as it doesn't push the voice coil out of its socket, which, to be honest, would require ridiculous amounts of power going through it. You're probably, in this case, much more worried about whether it's going to overheat than you are about the speaker actually jumping out of its socket like something out of Back to the Future. So, yeah, a 25 watt head would work perfectly well with this speaker. And it would probably sound decent at low to medium volumes as well. The sensitivity of the speaker is probably more what you've got to look at with lower wattage heads. A higher sensitivity speaker, meaning that the speaker itself can put out more volume without needing more wattage. Conversely, you might be looking the other way around. If you want to push the power tubes a little more and not have quite as loud an amp, you might be looking at something like the Celestion Greenback G12M, which has a slightly lower sensitivity, which means you need to push the tubes a little harder to get the same amount of volume, but that means you get a little more power amp saturation. But yeah, long story short, it's not a problem. Lower wattage heads work beautifully with the higher wattage speakers. I mean, if it was a 1000 watt speaker, maybe we'd be having a different conversation, but in this case, should be absolutely fine. One from James Cassidy here on modifying an SM57. So he took out the transformer, disconnected the wires, didn't take note of which colour wire was originally on which lead. What do you think I should do? If I get the wires opposite, since I may have to guess, will the mic just not work? Now, I've already talked to James one-to-one about this, but for everybody else, if you have the hot and cold wires on a microphone reversed, that just inverts the polarity. That makes it out of phase. So the way that I would test that is quite simple. I would get a non-modified SM57 or other microphone, because generally they're all wired the same way, and I would get the modified SM57, put them right next to each other and do a sound test, maybe a couple of claps or some burst of noise, and record it and look at the waveforms. If they both go the same way, it's in phase and you've done it right. If they're going the opposite way, they're out of polarity, which means that either you need to push the buttons on your preamp to flip that polarity, or you need to take those two wires off and wire them back the other way. And that's how I would test it. Old school. One on Guitar and Tech News 9 from Ola, England. Thanks for the write-up. This made my day when I saw this, so thank you, Ola. This has been the kind of thing that spurs me on to make more of these kind of videos, because Guitar and Tech News now is going to be a regular series, because we get things seen by major manufacturers and they get to know who we are, and that's kind of a big deal. I mean, the channel's growing a little bit, but we're still kind of small fries at this point, unless you're looking back at this years in the future. And we're trying to do everything we can in this next year to build the studio brand up, so watch this space. And that does it for Viewers Comments 10. Thanks for watching, and it's going to be a couple of weeks now until the next one gets released. In the meantime, in this slot next week should be Guitar and Tech News, where we have a lot of news from NAMM. We're not going to be physically at NAMM, but we're going to keep a close eye. There are already a couple of companies we're talking to where we know a couple of things that they're releasing, but we're not allowed to really tell you yet. So next week, we'll let you know about that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.